Your mom blocked my card. I can't even buy a closet." I heard her scream echoing through the phone, filled with fury and false tears. 10 minutes later, my own son stormed into my house like a thunderstorm. "Mom, give Diana the password right now," he shouted, his voice sharp enough to cut through my heart. I stood frozen, my coffee cup trembling in my hands, not yet realizing that my world was about to collapse. There were charges for a leather couch costing $3,000, a crystal chandelier worth $2,000, and a designer rug that cost more than my car's insurance for the entire year. When I confronted Diana, she put on such a performance that for a moment, I felt guilty for even asking. "Oh, Mom," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "I just wanted to make our house beautiful for when we have children." Tears welled up in his eyes. I was so stupid. I rose slowly and walked over to him. "You weren't stupid," I said softly. "You were manipulated. She fooled us all, even me. But now we know the truth. That's what matters." He turned to face me, his voice trembling. "Can you ever forgive me?" I smiled through my own tears. "Of course, my son. A mother's heart doesn't keep score. It only hopes her child finds his way home." He broke down then, wrapping his arms around me like he had when he was a little boy. For the first time in years, I felt the warmth of my son's embrace real, unfiltered, heavy with regret and love. We stood like that for a long time, two broken hearts finding their rhythm again. The weeks that followed were a blur of court dates, paperwork, and interviews with detectives. The case moved faster than I expected. Diana was charged with fraud, theft, money laundering, and assault with a deadly weapon. The local news even covered the story, though they left our names anonymous. "Woman accused of defrauding elderly widow in elaborate scheme," the headline said. I didn't care about the attention. I just wanted closure. During those weeks, Michael stayed with me. He filed for divorce within days of Diana's arrest. At first, he barely spoke, just worked, ate, and slept. But slowly, he began to open up. One evening, as we sat drinking coffee, he said, "You know what hurts the most? She made me doubt my own mother. I let her convince me that you were selfish." I reached for his hand. "She wanted to isolate you, son. That's how people like her operate. They break trust first, everything else follows." He nodded quietly. "I guess I needed to lose everything, to see clearly." Over time, I watched him heal. The angry lines on his face softened. The bitterness in his voice faded. He started attending therapy, joined a support group for victims of emotional manipulation, and even began volunteering at a local community center that helps seniors avoid financial scams. "Maybe something good can come from all this," he told me one day. I smiled. "That's what your father would say." He always believed pain could be turned into purpose. 6 months later, the trial finally began. I sat in the courtroom wearing a soft blue dress, the one Daniel had once said, made my eyes look young again. Michael sat beside me, nervous but resolute. When they brought Diana in, dressed in an orange prison uniform, I barely recognized her. The arrogance was gone. Her hair hung limp, her eyes dull. For a moment, I felt almost sorry for her, but then I remembered the fear in my house, the humiliation, the knife in her hand. She avoided my gaze the entire time. When the recordings played her own voice, admitting she sold the furniture, laughing about it, several people in the courtroom shook their heads in disbelief. Her lawyer tried to paint her as a woman desperate for security, but the evidence was overwhelming. After 2 days of testimony, the jury returned their verdict, guilty on all counts. I didn't cheer. I didn't cry. I just felt lighter. As the judge read out the sentence, 8 years in prison with restitution payments, I turned to Michael. He was crying silently. I placed my hand over his, and he whispered, "It's over, Mom." "Yes," I said softly. "It's over." Months later, as summer arrived, our lives began to settle again. The house no longer felt haunted. The laughter of my son returned to my kitchen. The smell of fresh coffee filled the mornings. And peace, real peace, took root once more. Sometimes, when I'm sewing late at night, I still think of all that happened. How close I came to losing not just my savings, but my soul. And every time, I whisper a quiet prayer of gratitude for the strength I didn't know I had, for the friends who stood beside me, and for the son who found his way back home. That autumn, Michael gave me a small box wrapped in gold paper. "What's this?" I asked. "Open it," he said, smiling. Inside was a delicate silver necklace with a tiny sewing needle charm. "For you," he said, "the strongest woman I know, the one who taught me what family really means." Tears filled my eyes. "Oh, Michael." He hugged me tightly. "Dad would be proud of you, Mom. You saved us both." I smiled, feeling the weight of those words sink gently into my heart. And for the first time in years, I truly believed it. "Don't you want your future grandchildren to grow up in a nice home?" Her voice was so soft, so fragile, that I felt my anger melting into confusion. I thought maybe I was being too harsh. After all, she and Michael were still young. Maybe she just didn't understand the value of money yet. But over the next few months, the spending continued and grew worse. Each time I tried to bring it up, Diana found a way to twist it back on me. "Mom, you're being dramatic. It's just a sofa." It's been almost a year since that day, the day the truth shattered my world, only to rebuild it stronger than before. Sometimes, when I sit by my window with a cup of tea and watch the sun sink behind the trees, I think about how fragile life can be. One moment, you're sewing dresses and believing love protects you. The next, you're standing in a courtroom, facing the woman who nearly destroyed your family. But I've learned something I wish I had known earlier. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, it means freeing yourself. For months, I carried anger like a stone in my chest. I thought I was protecting myself by holding on to it, but all it did was weigh me down. Then one morning, I looked at my reflection in the mirror and realized that the woman staring back wasn't angry anymore. She was tired but free. I decided that day to forgive Diana, not for her sake, but for mine, because bitterness is a poison that kills the one who drinks it first. Now, my days are quiet again. I still sew, still keep Daniel's photo near the window, still make coffee the way he liked it. But something inside me has changed. I've learned to trust my instincts, to set boundaries without guilt, and to believe that even in betrayal, there can be growth. Michael visits every Sunday. We talk, we laugh. Sometimes we sit in silence, and that silence feels like peace. He often tells me, "Mom, you taught me what strength looks like." But what he doesn't know is that he taught me too. He taught me that love, even when bruised, can heal. If someone asked me today what I would tell women my age, I would say this: don't let loneliness make you blind to red flags. Don't let kindness be mistaken for weakness. And never, ever apologize for protecting what you've built. We, mothers, often think our job ends when our children grow up. But sometimes, life asks us to be strong all over again, not for them, but for ourselves, because we are more than caretakers. We are the roots that hold the family tree steady, even when the storm comes. And when the storm passes, we stand taller not because we weren't shaken, but because we refused to fall. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched your heart, stay a little longer. More stories like mine are waiting to remind you it's never too late to find your strength again. Mom, it's not your money, it's our family's future. Mom, Dad would have wanted you to share. That last line always broke me. Using Daniel's name, his memory to justify her greed, was cruel beyond words. When I finally told Michael that his wife was spending too much, he looked at me as though I'd insulted him. "Mom," he said stiffly, "Diana just wants us to have a comfortable home. Why can't you be happy for us?" That night, Lying alone in bed, I realized something had changed. My son, the boy I had carried in my arms, taught to pray, nursed through fevers and heartbreaks, was no longer mine. His loyalty had shifted. He belonged to her now. Over the next few weeks, I began noticing things I had missed before. Diana's manicured nails, her expensive handbags, the designer clothes that appeared in her closet every time she came over. I started paying closer attention to my bank statements, and the numbers made my stomach twist. She wasn't just spending money. She was draining my life, dollar by dollar, swipe by swipe. One afternoon, while cleaning my sewing room, I found a receipt that had fallen from Diana's purse. It was from a luxury salon downtown, a facial treatment worth $400. I stared at it for a long moment, my hands trembling. That was almost what I earned for sewing an entire wedding dress. I remember whispering to myself, $400? For what? For lies? That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table under the weak light of the old lamp Daniel had fixed years ago, staring at the stack of bills and bank statements. Every line told the same story: greed, manipulation, deceit. By the end of the third month, Diana had spent nearly $25,000 from my account. $25,000. That was more than what many families earned in a year. I finally gathered the courage to confront her. I called her to come over for coffee, pretending to be calm. When she arrived, her perfume filled the room before her voice did. "Sweet Mom," she chirped. "You look tired. Are you okay?" I took a deep breath and slid the printed statements across the table. "Diana," I said softly, "I know you've been using my card for more than groceries. I see the transactions, the furniture, the salon visits, the designer clothes. This has to stop." Her smile froze, but only for a second. Then, with a perfectly timed sigh, she put a hand on her chest and said, "Oh, Mom, I didn't think you'd take it that way. We're family. You said you wanted to help. I thought it made you happy to see us doing well." That day, for the first time, I saw a glimmer of something cold behind her eyes, something that didn't belong to the sweet girl I thought she was. A few days later, Michael showed up, angry. "Why did you embarrass Diana like that?" he demanded. "She was crying all night. You don't trust her anymore." I felt my throat tighten. "Michael," I said, my voice trembling, "she spent $25,000 in 3 months." He looked at me, then at the papers, and simply shrugged. "You have the money, Mom. What's the big deal?" That was the moment I realized I had lost not just my savings, but my son's heart. And yet, I still didn't know the worst was yet to come. Because the woman who had been draining my bank account was about to steal something even more precious: my peace, my dignity, and almost my life. After that conversation with my son, something inside me broke. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was more like a dull, heavy ache that refused to fade. I kept replaying his words in my head. "You have the money, Mom." I never thought the boy I raised with love would turn that anger against me. But that day was only the beginning. Please, stay and listen to my story. My name is Margaret Reynolds, and I am 67 years old. For as long as I can remember, I have been the kind of woman people describe as steady, kind, and maybe a little too trusting. I built my life with my hands, quite literally. What's the big deal? That night, I sat alone in my sewing room, surrounded by bolts of fabric in gold, coral, and soft lilac, the colors that once made me feel peaceful. But now, even the shimmer of silk reminded me of Diana's dresses, her fake smile, her voice dripping with sweetness whenever she called me Mom. I realized something bitter that night. Kindness can become a weapon in the wrong hands. The next morning, I called the bank. The young man who answered was polite but hesitant when I asked for printed copies of all recent transactions. "Of course, Mrs. Reynolds," he said. "Would you like me to include the last 3 months or the full year?" "The full year," I replied firmly. When the papers arrived by mail 2 days later, I spread them across my kitchen table like a battlefield. Every line felt like a wound boutique: stores, luxury furniture, hotel stays, fine dining restaurants. My hands trembled as I traced each number with my finger. $3,000, 2,500, 800, 400. The list went on. I tried to imagine Diana's face as she signed those receipts, probably smiling, pretending she was living a life she had earned, when in reality she was draining mine. I thought about Daniel, about how he used to come home from construction sites covered in dust, his back aching, his hands rough and blistered. Every dollar in that account was a piece of him, his sweat, his effort, his love for me and our son. And that woman had turned it all into chandeliers and handbags. The next day, I went to see Angela, my neighbor and oldest friend. She's one of those women who always knows everything happening in town, not because she's nosy, but because people trust her. She poured us tea, and before I could even start, she said, "You look like you haven't slept in days, Margaret. What's wrong?" When I told her everything, the spending, the lies, the confrontation, her eyes widened. Then she sighed, shaking her head. "I hate to tell you this, but I saw Diana at the mall last week," she said slowly. "She was showing off to her friends, saying her mother-in-law is so generous she'll never have to work a day in her life." I felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath me. "She said that?" I whispered. Angela nodded, her expression full of sympathy. I thought maybe she was exaggerating, but the way she laughed, the way her friends looked at her, Margaret, she meant it. That night, I didn't just cry. I sobbed. Not because of the money, but because of the humiliation. I had become the fool of her little theater, the naive old woman funding her luxury life. The next morning, I made a decision. I was done being the fool. I dressed neatly, tied my hair, and walked to the bank in town. The same young man who had spoken to me on the phone greeted me with a smile. "Good morning, Mrs. Reynolds," he said. "How can I help you today?" "I'd like to change my password," I told him calmly, "and cancel all cards associated with my account." He nodded, though his expression softened when I added, "Someone I trusted has been taking advantage of me." When I left the bank that morning, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: control. For the first time since Daniel's death, I had done something for myself, something to protect what he had left behind. But I had no idea that by cutting Diana off, I had lit the fuse of a much bigger explosion. 2 days later, the phone rang while I was finishing a silver satin dress for a local bride. I picked up, still holding a needle between my fingers. "Sweet Mom," Diana's voice cooed through the line. "I went to buy a few little things for the house, and your card isn't working. Is there a problem with the bank?" My heart thudded. I swallowed hard and said as evenly as I could, "No, Diana. I canceled that card. It's time you and Michael manage your own expenses." There was a long silence. When she spoke again, her voice was no longer sweet. It was sharp as broken glass. "How could you do that to me? I am your family." I didn't argue. I simply said, "Family doesn't take advantage of each other, Diana. You've spent $25,000 in 3 months. It has to stop." She hung up without another word. I thought that was the end of it. But later that afternoon, Michael stormed into my house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. "Mom, what the hell did you do?" he shouted. "Diana's been crying all morning. She said you embarrassed her, that you don't trust her anymore." I tried to stay calm. "Michael," I said quietly, "she's been stealing from me. Look at the statements." I handed him the papers, hoping he'd see reason. Since I was 15, I've worked as a seamstress, sewing wedding gowns, prom dresses, and tiny christening outfits for the babies of our small Midwestern town. Every stitch I made carried a prayer. Every hemline a quiet promise that hard work and honesty would always be enough. My late husband Daniel used to say my sewing machine sounded like music. "It's the sound of your heart," he'd tell me, leaning in the doorway of my little workshop. but he barely glanced at them before pushing them away. "You're exaggerating. She's just trying to make our home nice. You've always been frugal, Mom, but you can't expect us to live like it's the 1970 seconds. Things cost money." That was when I realized he wasn't angry for Diana, he was angry with her. They were a team now, and I was the enemy. In the following days, the phone calls started. Diana, with her shifting tones begging one moment, threatening the next. "Sweet Mom, please. Just one more thousand. I promise it's the last." Then the next day, "You'll regret this, Margaret. Family is everything, and you're destroying yours." Each message made my stomach twist tighter. One night, I sat at my kitchen table again, surrounded by receipts and bills. That's when I noticed something strange. Diana's purchases always came in pairs, two of the same sofa, two tables, two large televisions. Why would she need two of everything? I called Angela the next morning. "Could you ask your niece, the one who works at the consignment market, to keep an eye out for furniture being sold there? Something that looks new, expensive, maybe even duplicates?" 2 days later, Angela came knocking on my door, her face pale. "You're not going to believe this," she said. "My niece saw Diana at the market. She's been selling brand new furniture, the exact kind that shows up on your bank statements." The words hit me like a slap. That was the moment I realized Diana wasn't just careless or greedy. She was running a business, a fraud, funded entirely by my savings. She used my card to buy luxury items, sold them for cash, and kept the money. It was organized, calculated, professional. My hands shook as I whispered, "She's selling my furniture for profit." Angela nodded grimly. "It's a scam, Margaret, and you're not her first victim, I bet." That night, I barely slept. I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Every lie, every fake tear, every manipulative word suddenly made sense. She hadn't married my son for love. She had married him to get to me. I looked around my house, the sewing machine Daniel had bought me, the photos of our family, the soft yellow curtains I had sewn years ago, and I made a silent promise. No one will ever steal from me again. The next morning, I started my own investigation. I visited the stores where the biggest purchases had been made, pretending to be a curious grandmother asking about a recent order my daughter-in-law made. In one shop, the clerk remembered Diana right away. "Oh yes," she said cheerfully. "Such a stylish young woman." She bought two of the same Italian leather sofas, said one was for her and one for her mother-in-law. What a generous gift. I smiled faintly. "Yes," I murmured. "Very generous indeed." By the end of that day, I had confirmed it at 3 different stores. Duplicate purchases, all made on my card. I came home exhausted but burning with purpose. I wasn't the helpless widow she thought I was. I had lived 67 years, survived heartbreak, hard work, and loss. I could survive this too. But something told me something deep, instinctive, that Diana wouldn't go down quietly. Because when a woman like her feels her power slipping, she doesn't surrender. She attacks. And I was about to find out just how dangerous she could become. The morning after I confirmed Diana's scheme, the world felt different. The sky outside my window looked too bright, almost mocking. I sat at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold, trying to decide what to do next. I could feel Daniel's presence somehow, as if he were standing right behind me. He used to say, "When you see wrong, don't look away, Margaret. If you stay silent, you're agreeing with it." Those words guided my next steps. That same afternoon, I went back to the bank to meet Mr. Harris, the branch manager, a man about my age who had known Daniel and me for decades. He greeted me kindly, but his smile faded when I showed him the receipts and told him what had happened. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said gravely, adjusting his glasses, "this is serious. What you're describing is not a misunderstanding, it's financial fraud. And if your daughter-in-law has been reselling these items for cash, that could also qualify as money laundering. The words money laundering made my heart sink. I couldn't believe it had come to this. My family, my own son's wife, involved in something criminal. I just want my peace back, I whispered. And my son, he nodded. I understand. But before we can take legal action, we'll need to document everything. We spent 42 years together, through joy, struggle, and the kind of ordinary days that people overlook but end up missing the most. When he passed away from a sudden heart attack 2 years ago, the silence he left behind was deafening. For the first time in my life, I could hear every tick of the clock, every creak of the floorboards, and the emptiness of a house too big for one person. After Daniel's funeral, I learned something that surprised me. Keep every statement, every receipt, every message. And if you can, get proof of those resales. I left the bank that day with a folder full of documents and a determination stronger than fear. But I didn't get the chance to make my next move because Diana made hers first. That evening, while I was cooking a simple dinner of soup and bread, I heard the screech of tires outside. Moments later, the front door swung open so violently, it hit the wall. Michael stood there, face flushed, eyes burning with rage. "Mom," he shouted, "what did you tell the bank? Mr. Harris called us about suspicious transactions. Did you go behind our backs?" Behind him, Diana appeared, her expression composed but her eyes glittering with triumph. She had already twisted the story, I realized. "Michael," I said quietly, "I went to protect what's left of your father's savings. Your wife has been—" "Enough," he interrupted, slamming his hand against the table. "Diana told me everything. You're obsessed with money. You've been harassing her, accusing her of stealing when all she's done is try to make a good home for us." I looked at my son, my boy, and for the first time, I didn't recognize him. His voice, his posture, even his eyes were no longer his own. They belonged to her. Diana placed a delicate hand on his arm. "Sweetheart, don't yell at her. She's just confused. Grief can make people act irrationally." That last word stung like a slap. Irrational. That was her new weapon, make me sound unstable. I took a slow breath. "Diana, I know what you're doing. I've seen the receipts. I've spoken to store owners. You've been buying things with my card and selling them for cash." For a moment, her mask cracked. Then she laughed, a soft, musical laugh that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, Mom, you've been watching too many TV dramas. I don't need to sell furniture. I just have taste. Something you clearly can't understand." Stop lying," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "I've seen the truth with my own eyes." Michael slammed his fist on the table again. "Mom, that's enough. You're destroying this family." "Destroying it?" I whispered. "Michael, I'm trying to save it." But he didn't hear me. He turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard that the dishes rattled in the cupboards. Diana lingered a moment longer, smiling that cruel little smile of hers. "You really shouldn't have gone to the bank," she said softly. "You're only making things harder for yourself." And then she left. That night, I cried until I had no tears left. I didn't sleep. I just sat in the dark, staring at the photo of Daniel and me on our wedding day. He was so handsome in his gray suit, his smile full of warmth and promise. I could almost hear his voice again. "When people show you who they are, believe them." The next morning, my phone started ringing before sunrise. Unknown number. When I answered, Diana's voice was sharp and venomous. "You think you can turn Michael against me?" she hissed. "You're an old, bitter woman who can't stand seeing your son happy. If you don't stop, I'll make sure everyone believes you've lost your mind." Then she hung up. My hands were trembling, but I refused to cry this time. Fear had turned into fury. 2 days later, I found out just how far she was willing to go. A neighbor called me mid-afternoon. Margaret, she said nervously, I just saw an ambulance outside Michael and Diana's place. Is everything okay? My heart nearly stopped. I grabbed my coat and drove over as fast as I could. When I arrived, Diana was being lifted onto a stretcher, pale and weeping dramatically, clutching her stomach. Mom, Michael cried, running toward me. She fainted from stress. She's been sick for days because of everything you've done. I stood frozen as paramedics loaded her into the ambulance. Diana turned her head slightly and caught my eyes, and in that moment, I saw it clearly. There were no tears, no pain, just triumph. She was staging it. At the hospital, a young doctor approached us after examining her. She's fine physically, he said. Just emotional exhaustion, maybe too much family tension. Diana lay in the hospital bed, surrounded by flowers she'd demanded Michael buy on the way in. When I stepped into the room, she gave me a weak smile. Mom, she whispered, forgive me if I've caused you any trouble. I just wanted peace between us. It was all theater. Every word rehearsed, every gesture timed perfectly. I realized then that she wasn't just manipulative, she was dangerous. He had saved more money than I ever realized, almost $120,000 between his construction pension, life insurance, and our joint savings. It was more money than I had ever seen at once. I remember sitting in the lawyer's office, hands trembling as I held the papers. It felt like holding Daniel's last gift to me, a promise that I could live out the rest of my days with dignity, without needing to depend on anyone. I thought that money would bring me peace. That night, as I drove home from the hospital under the pale light of the street lamps, something hardened inside me. The Margaret who had been soft, gentle, forgiving, she was gone. The woman who remained was ready to fight. The next morning, I went back to Mr. Harris at the bank with all my documents and evidence. He listened quietly as I laid everything out: the duplicate purchases, the resales, the photos Angela's niece had taken. Mrs. Reynolds, he said finally, we can open a formal investigation. It will take time, but if everything you've told me is true, we can recover much of what was stolen. However, it will require you to make a police report. A police report? I repeated, almost whispering. Against my own daughter-in-law? He nodded solemnly. Sometimes justice begins at home. I walked out of that bank, trembling but resolute. I wasn't going to be intimidated by tears, hospital theatrics, or manipulation. I was going to protect Daniel's legacy and myself. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table again, the same place where I had once sewed gowns for happy brides. Only this time, I wasn't stitching silk. I was stitching my courage back together. I called Angela and told her everything. We'll get her, Margaret, she said firmly. That girl's been too smug for too long. Let's gather the proof. Once we have it, she'll have nowhere to hide. For the first time in months, I felt something new, not fear, not despair, but clarity. Diana thought I was weak. She thought I'd stay quiet out of love for my son. But she had forgotten one thing. Even the gentlest mother can turn fierce when someone threatens her family's soul. I looked at the photo of Daniel again and whispered, "You were right, love. I can't look away anymore." And in that moment, I knew exactly what I had to do. Tomorrow, the hunter would become the hunted. When dawn came the next morning, I was already dressed and waiting by the window. I hadn't slept. The night had been long and filled with thoughts that raced like restless birds inside my mind. Every sound of the house, the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator reminded me that I was alone, but also that I still had control of my home. And this time, I would not surrender it. I began my morning with a notebook and a plan. Every con artist makes one mistake, and I just had to find Diana's. Angela arrived a little after 9, carrying a tray of coffee and her determined smile. "So," she said, setting down the cups. "How do we start?" "We start with proof," I told her. "Not just receipts or stories, Undeniable evidence. Angela nodded. You still have that spare key to Michael's house, don't you? I hesitated for a moment. Yes, I said slowly. He gave it to me when they first moved in, for emergencies. Uh, well, Angela said with a knowing glance. This is an emergency. That Saturday, while Diana was busy at her usual second-hand market, Angela and I drove quietly to Michael's house. My heart pounded as I unlocked the door. I felt guilty, but the truth was more important than manners now. The moment we stepped inside, my suspicions were confirmed. The house looked wrong. The famous red leather sofa Diana had bought for $3,000? Gone. The glass dining table worth over $2,000? Gone. The luxury chandelier, the designer appliances, the decorative rugs all gone. In their place were cheap, second-hand pieces that looked like they had been picked up from yard sales. Good Lord, Angela whispered, covering her mouth. She really sold it all. We moved quietly from room to room, documenting everything with photos on my phone. I took pictures of every missing item, every empty corner. Then, in the bedroom, I noticed a small shoebox tucked behind some clothes in the closet. Inside were neatly stacked bills, hundreds of dollars in cash, organized by denomination. That's her profit, Angela muttered. But what we found next made my blood run cold. Behind Diana's rows of designer dresses, there was a folder labeled Private in her handwriting. Inside, we discovered pages filled with notes, names, phone numbers, and personal details of other women from our neighborhood. Each page described them in cruel detail. Widow, lonely, savings account around $80 kelvins. Son lives nearby, emotionally dependent. It was a list of targets. And at the top of the first page, in neat handwriting, was my name. Margaret Reynolds, sentimental widow. Son, easy to manipulate. Savings, around $120,000. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. My own life, reduced to a paragraph. My grief, my love, my trust, all turned into tools for her deception. Angela reached for my hand. Instead, it invited trouble right into my front door. The trouble's name was Diana, my daughter-in-law. When my son, Michael, first brought her home 3 years ago, I truly believed he had found an angel. She had soft, honey-colored hair, a sweet smile, and a voice that could melt butter. She called me Mom from the very first day we met, hugged me as if she had known me her whole life, and insisted on helping me wash the dishes after dinner. Margaret, she's a predator. She's done this before. I nodded, my throat too tight for words. We took photos of everything the lists, the cash, the house, and left as quietly as we had entered. My hands trembled the entire drive home. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about those notes. It wasn't just me. There were other names, other widows who might have already been hurt or who could be next. Diana wasn't just greedy. She was calculated, dangerous, and she had to be stopped. The next morning, I called Mr. Harris at the bank again and explained what I had found. I could hear the disbelief in his voice turn to concern as I spoke. Mrs. Reynolds, he said, this is more than theft. What you're describing could be a full-scale fraud operation. We need to involve the police. He gave me the contact of a detective who specialized in financial crimes, Detective Ryan Harrison, and encouraged me to meet him as soon as possible. But before going to the authorities, I decided to set one final trap. I wanted Diana to expose herself in her own words. Angela helped me prepare. We bought a small audio recorder, just a simple one from the electronics store, and hid it inside a decorative vase on my living room shelf. Then I called Diana. Diana, I said softly, pretending my voice was shaky. Can you come by this evening? I've been thinking about our conversation. Maybe I was too harsh. I just want peace in the family. There was a long pause before she replied. her tone dripping with false sweetness. "Of course, Mom. I'll be there at 6. At exactly 6 o'clock, she arrived perfectly on time, perfectly dressed. She wore a violet silk blouse and diamond earrings that sparkled under the light. The scent of her perfume filled my living room before her words did. "Mom," she said, walking in like she owned the place. "I'm glad you came to your senses." I forced a polite smile and gestured for her to sit down. "Would you like some tea? Please," she said, crossing her legs and studying me. "You look tired. Stress isn't good for a woman your age." I ignored the insult. "I've been thinking," I began, "and maybe we can find a way to make this right. You said you just wanted to build a good life with Michael. I can understand that." She smiled, sensing victory. "Exactly. I knew you'd see reason. And I just need to know," I said softly, "how you plan to handle all those purchases, the furniture, the appliances, everything. I mean, there are so many duplicates. Where is all of it?" Her eyes flickered for just a moment, a tiny crack in her performance before she recovered. "Oh, some of it's in storage. Some I might sell. Why let things go to waste, right?" "So, you are selling them?" I pressed gently, pretending to be curious, not accusatory. She shrugged with a careless laugh. "Maybe a few. It's smart business, isn't it? Besides, it's money you would have given me anyway." And there it was her confession. I forced a smile and nodded, even as my heart pounded. "You're very resourceful, Diana." "I am," she said proudly. "You should thank me. I've been managing this family better than you ever could." That one hurt, but I stayed silent. After a few more minutes of small talk, she stood up, smoothing her blouse. "Well, Mom, I think we understand each other now. Let's not make this ugly again. You'll give me access to your card again, and I'll make sure Michael never has to know about your little obsession with control." The smugness in her tone made me sick. "And if I refuse?" I asked. She turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Then I'll tell Michael you've been harassing me, that you're paranoid, losing your mind, maybe even dangerous. He already believes you're unstable, Margaret. You'd just be proving me right." I sat there, stunned. She had planned it all, every lie, every manipulation, every step of my downfall. But what she didn't know was that every word she'd just spoken was being recorded. When she left, I didn't cry. I didn't even shake. I just walked to the shelf, took the recorder from the vase, and pressed stop. The faint click of that button was the sound of victory. The next morning, I took everything, the photos, the receipts, the recordings, the notes from her folder, to Detective Harrison's office. He was a tall, serious man in his 40s, with the kind of calm that comes from years of dealing with difficult cases. After I explained everything, he leaned back in his chair, looking at me with a mixture of respect and disbelief. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said slowly, "this is one of the most organized domestic fraud cases I've ever seen." I was touched, honestly moved, because I had prayed for years that Michael would find a woman who would love him as much as Daniel and I did. How foolish I was. Diana was not an angel. She was a master actress. Every word she spoke was part of a performance so convincing that even I, a woman with decades of experience reading people's hearts, couldn't see through it. At first, it was all small things, compliments, sweet gestures. "Mom, your stitching is amazing. You've gathered more evidence than most professionals." I smiled faintly. "I've had practice, years of attention to detail with a sewing needle." He chuckled softly. "Well, your precision is about to pay off. We'll start a formal investigation immediately. I'll need you to stay available for questioning. And if she contacts you again, record everything." "Don't worry," I said quietly. "I intend to." That evening, when I returned home, I sat down by the window and watched the sunset. The orange light spilled across the street, warm and silent. For the first time in months, I felt peace creeping back into my heart. Daniel used to tell me, "You can't control how others act, but you can control what you do with the truth." And now, I had the truth. All of it captured in sound, images, and ink. I knew it would break Michael's heart when he finally saw it. But sometimes, breaking a heart is the only way to save a soul. Tomorrow, I would show him everything. Tomorrow, my son would finally see the woman he had married for who she truly was. The morning I decided to confront Diana for the last time, the world outside felt unusually calm, like the silence before a storm. The air was still, the light soft, almost too peaceful for what was about to happen. I had spent the night preparing. The documents were neatly arranged in a folder on the dining table, photos of her resale scheme, copies of her notebook, the recordings I'd captured. Every piece of evidence was there, ready to destroy the empire of lies she had built. At 9 in the morning, I called her. My voice didn't shake. "Diana," I said evenly, "I've been thinking about your offer. Maybe we can reach an agreement after all. Why don't you come over this afternoon so we can talk face to face?" Her tone on the other end was smooth, triumphant. "Of course, Mom. I knew you'd come around. I'll be there at 3. Oh, I hung up the phone, took a deep breath, and whispered to myself, "This ends today." Angela came by a little before noon. She brought sandwiches I couldn't eat and courage I desperately needed. "Are you sure you want to do this alone?" she asked. "Yes," I said firmly. "This is my fight." "Then promise me one thing," she said, gripping my hand. "If anything goes wrong, call the police immediately." I nodded. She left reluctantly, but not before squeezing my shoulder and saying, "Make her face what she's done, Margaret. But don't let her drag you into her madness." When the clock struck 3, I heard the familiar sound of Diana's car pulling into the driveway. I straightened my blouse, took one last breath, and opened the door before she could knock. She stepped inside, as if she owned the place, wearing a deep purple silk suit, her lips painted a perfect shade of red. The same red, I thought bitterly, as the expensive sofa she'd sold for cash. "Mom," she said sweetly, setting her handbag on the couch, "I'm glad you came to your senses. You did the right thing." "Did I?" I asked quietly, gesturing for her to sit. "Let's make sure of that." We sat across from each other at the dining table. The folder lay between us like a loaded weapon. "I've been thinking," I began slowly. "Maybe I was too quick to judge. I know you care about Michael, and I just want peace in the family. But before I make any decisions, there are things I need to understand." She smiled that fake, polished smile that had fooled us all. "Of course, Mom. I'm an open book." "Then tell me," I said softly, "why did you buy 2 of everything?" Her eyes flickered, just for an instant, then steadied. "Oh, that? Some were gifts. Some were returns. You know how shopping can get confusing." And the cash?" I asked, my voice calm but deliberate. "The envelopes of money hidden in your closet, are those gifts too?" For the first time, she froze. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. "You had no right to go through my things," she snapped. I leaned forward. "You had no right to steal from me." Silence filled the room. For a moment, I could hear only the clock ticking on the wall, steady, patient, merciless. Then she laughed, low and cold. "You're unbelievable. You think anyone's going to believe you over me? You're an old woman, Margaret. I could say you've been harassing me, that you're losing your mind, and your son would take my side in a heartbeat." "Maybe he would," I said, standing up slowly. "But I don't need him to believe me. I have proof." Her eyes narrowed. "What proof?" I opened the folder and began laying the photos out one by one. The empty rooms, the cash box. "You should sell your designs online. You'd make a fortune." "Mom, you're the kind of woman I hope to become one day." She'd bring me flowers, take selfies with me at family dinners, even post about how much she loved her mother-in-law. Everyone thought we were inseparable. But behind that smile, I later learned she was already studying me, my habits, my weaknesses, my finances. The first time she asked for money, it sounded innocent enough. The handwritten notes describing me and other women as potential targets. As she stared at the evidence, the color drained from her face. "Where did you get these?" she demanded. "From your own house," I said. And that's not all. I pressed play on my phone, and her own voice filled the room. "Maybe I sold a few things. It's smart business, isn't it? It's money you would have given me anyway." Her eyes widened in horror. "That's a confession," I said softly. "Every word of it." For a few seconds, she just stared at me, speechless. Then, slowly, her expression hardened. The pretense vanished. The sweet, charming daughter-in-law was gone, replaced by the real Diana. Cold, calculating, and vicious. "You've made a huge mistake," she hissed. "If you go to the police, I'll ruin you. I'll tell everyone you hit me. I'll tell Michael you've been threatening me. He already thinks you're crazy. All I have to do is cry, and he'll believe me." Ugh. I looked her straight in the eyes. "I'm done being afraid of you." I picked up the phone and dialed the number Detective Harrison had given me. She watched me, her face twisting in disbelief. "Who are you calling?" "The police," I said simply. That was when she snapped. With a furious scream, she lunged toward me, knocking the phone from my hand. "You stupid old witch," she shouted. "You're going to destroy everything. Do you even realize what you're doing?" She was shaking, her hair falling loose, her eyes wild. I backed away slowly, heart pounding. "Diana, stop. This won't end well for you." But she wasn't listening. She ran into the kitchen, and I heard the metallic scrape of a drawer opening. When she turned back toward me, she was holding a butcher knife. "If you're going to ruin me," she spat, "I'm taking you with me." For a heartbeat, I froze. Then instinct took over. I backed toward the front door, trying to keep my voice calm. "Diana, put the knife down. You don't want to do this." Her chest was heaving, her voice trembling between fury and despair. 3 years. 3 years of pretending. You think I liked living with your boring son? I did it all for this, and you ruined it." She took a step closer. I reached for the phone again with trembling hands and dialed 911. "Emergency. How can I help you?" the operator said. "I need help," I gasped. "My daughter-in-law is in my house. She has a knife." Within moments, I could hear sirens in the distance, faint but growing louder. Diana's expression twisted into panic. "You called the cops on me?" she screamed. "You'd send your own family to prison?" "You stopped being family the moment you betrayed us," I said quietly. The pounding on the front door grew louder. "Police! Open the door!" Diana turned toward the sound, knife still raised, her breathing ragged. "You can't do this," she shrieked. "You're nothing without your son. You'll die alone." But before she could move closer, the door burst open. 3 officers entered, weapons drawn. "Drop the knife," one shouted. She hesitated, shaking. "She's lying," Diana screamed, pointing at me. "She attacked me first. She's crazy." But her wild eyes and trembling hands told another story. "Drop the knife," the officer repeated. When she didn't, one of them stepped forward swiftly, knocking it from her grip and pulling her arms behind her back. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through my living room. "It's over, Diana," I said softly. She glared at me, her face twisted with hate. "You think you've won? Michael will never forgive you. You'll die miserable and alone." Maybe she thought those words would break me. But instead, I felt an unexpected calm wash over me. For the first time in months, I was free. Detective Harrison arrived shortly after the officers took her away. He sat with me at the table, flipping through the evidence I'd prepared. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said, impressed. "This is more than enough. She'll be charged with credit card fraud, theft, and attempted assault. I nodded numbly, staring at the empty space where she'd been standing just an hour earlier. She almost fooled everyone, I whispered. Even me. She's a professional manipulator, he said gently. But you did something most people never do. You stood up to her. Later that evening, when the last officer left and the house was finally quiet again, I sat down on the sofa and looked around. The air smelled faintly of her perfume, but it was fading fast. Outside, the sky was darkening, and a soft rain began to fall, a cleansing rain that felt like mercy. I picked up the photo of Daniel again and whispered, "It's over, love." I kept my promise. "Mom," she said one afternoon while I was sewing a lace wedding gown, "Michael's paycheck was a little short this month. Could I borrow your card just to buy some groceries? We'll pay you back next week." I didn't even hesitate. I loved them both and wanted to help. I handed her my card with a smile, telling her to take what she needed. I imagined she'd buy food, diapers, cleaning supplies. You know the usual. A week later, I opened my bank statement and nearly fainted. And as the rain tapped gently against the windows, I realized something. Sometimes justice doesn't come from the law alone. Sometimes it comes from the strength you didn't know you had until someone tried to break you. The house felt hollow after they took Diana away. The sound of the front door closing behind the officers echoed like a final sentence, a quiet exhale of justice and grief. I sat on the couch for a long time, staring at the empty space where she had stood only hours ago, spitting her venom and waving a knife. The adrenaline faded slowly, leaving behind exhaustion so heavy it made my bones ache. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Somewhere outside, the rain had stopped, leaving behind the faint smell of wet earth. I thought I would feel victorious, but all I felt was sadness. She had stolen money, yes, but what hurt far more was what she had taken from me emotionally. My son's trust, my sense of peace, my faith that love within a family was sacred. I didn't have long to rest. Less than an hour later, the phone rang. It was Michael. "Mom," he shouted before I could even say hello. "What the hell did you do?" "The police called me. They said Diana's been arrested." "What were you thinking?" I closed my eyes, steadying my voice. "Michael, come home. We need to talk. There are things you don't know." "I don't want to talk," he snapped. "I want answers." "How could you do this to her? To me?" "Please, son," I whispered. "Just come. Bring whoever you need to, but come." He hung up without responding. I sat in silence, listening to the quiet hum of my refrigerator, the ticking clock, the slow rhythm of my own breathing. I had faced worse that day, but nothing frightened me more than what was coming: my son's anger. He arrived a little after 8, his face pale and eyes burning with confusion and rage. A man in a suit followed him, Steve, his friend from work, who also happened to be a lawyer. "Mom," Michael said coldly, "you'd better have a damn good explanation for this." "Sit down," I said softly. "Both of you." Steve spoke first. "Mrs. Reynolds, do you understand what you've done? You've made a serious accusation. If you're wrong, it could destroy your son's marriage and reputation." I nodded. "I understand. That's why I'm not asking you to believe my words. I'm asking you to look at the truth." I gestured to the table, where I had laid out the evidence just as I had for the detective. Photos, receipts, bank statements, copies of Diana's notes. Michael crossed his arms, skeptical, but as he leaned over and began to read, his expression started to change. First confusion, then disbelief, then horror. He picked up one of the pages, his voice trembling. She wrote this? About you? About other women?" "Yes," I said quietly. "That's her handwriting. I found it in her closet." Steve read through the documents with the sharp eyes of a professional. When he reached the last page, he exhaled slowly. "Michael," he said gently, This isn't a misunderstanding. Your wife's been running a scam. What your mother uncovered, it's a full criminal operation. If she hadn't reported it, you could have been dragged into a federal investigation without even knowing it." Michael stared at him, then back at me. "No," he whispered. "No. She loved me. She couldn't have." I reached across the table, placing my hand over his. "Son, she didn't love you. She used you to reach me. Everything, the tears, the affection, it was all an act." He pulled his hand away, covering his face. For a long time, none of us spoke. The only sound was his quiet, shaky breathing. Finally, he looked up, his eyes red. "I told you she was crying when you canceled the card," he said bitterly. "I thought she was hurt, but she was probably angry because the money stopped." I nodded slowly. "I tried to tell you, but you couldn't see it then. You were in love." He laughed, a small, broken sound. "Love? I don't even know what to call it now." Steve cleared his throat softly. "Michael, your wife's facing multiple charges: fraud, theft, and assault. The police have enough to hold her. You need to decide whether you'll cooperate with the investigation or try to protect her." Michael stared at him blankly, then shook his head. "I don't even know who I married." He stood up suddenly and began pacing the room, running his hands through his hair. "I defended her. I shouted at you. God, Mom, I hit the table in your face. I said awful things.